This show is brought to you by Safety FM.
Warning, the following broadcast contains adult language, adult content, frank safety discussions, and stories that might sound unbelievable. But believe me, every one of those stories is true. We didn't start the safety war, but we are going to fight to win it. For our families, for our communities, for our workplaces, and for our lives.
So, this is our episode on food in a disaster. And that's really something you need to prepare for, where your food sources are and everything else. So, just for another review, 4 categories of emergencies as described by Jim. Number 1, your 0 to 24 hours, right? That where you have to prepare for power outage, anything like that. 0 to 24. Then category 2, 24 to 72 or 96 hours. That's what the government says that you need to be prepared for. That's FEMA. And then category 3, Jim describes it, that's me, from 72 or 96 hours up to 30 days, and then after 30 days as category 4. All these things have to be planned for. And remember, let's say someone has some health problems like diabetes or something like that, you're really going to have to prepare for this. Now you're going to think, well, just like with the water in an office setting, no, I really didn't go into that, food in an office setting or in a work setting, all has to be planned out ahead of time. So let's say that you're in your house and there's a disaster. So this seems to be where we're going with all these. You have a power outage, 24 hours. Okay, most people have enough food in their house, dried food, things of that nature, canned food. Last 24 hours, you may not be eating what you really like. Now, you may have those beans, right? A can of beans, can of corn, string beans, all that other stuff in can, right? Or dried food, like, I'm thinking like ramen noodle soup, things of that nature. Okay, you could deal with it. Okay, 1 day, you're all right. Now, 2 or 3 days, okay, you probably get that. Most people do not have, in my experience, more than 2 or 3 days. And let's forget about what's in the refrigerator if you don't have any power in that refrigerator. What do? Right? Some of the food will keep. I'm not going to make recommendations because I don't feel like getting sued because, hey, Jim Poesl told me to do X, Y, and Z. So you have to figure this out on your own, do the assessment, analyze it, and of course act in 3 A's. So let's look at this scenario. You went out and you said, well, I'm going to get one of these survival kits that are widely available with survival food, good for 25 years. Now there's a disaster. You blow through your own cupboard. And I'm going to assume people only buy stuff that they like. Now you start to move into these disaster supplies. Let's say you have a picky eater in the house. You have children in the house, that, like my daughter, who loves the mac. Now she's 8 years old. Guess what? She's eating more than mac and cheese now. Thank God. Or and hot dogs. What do you do with people who can't? You buy this stuff and it's inedible. You don't like it. Now you made yourself now it's a worse situation. You may have food that nobody likes. They're under psychological stress because of being in a major disaster. They don't have food. Maybe now you have to go out and get food from some government assistance. You may not like that food. It's a big nightmare, and it's going to cause psychological damage and stress in an already stressful situation. So this is what I recommend. You have to rotate your stock of food. Don't buy more than what different things for an emergency that you're not used to eating all the time. Imagine going out and buying food that nobody in the house likes. Now you're in a disaster. You may not have access to food right away. Now you have to eat all this food that you don't like. What I recommend is just buy a little bit more each week. This is not... Now, if you have to go out in a major disaster, like with the lockdowns with COVID that we dealt with, and we'll talk about that in a minute, the food that you're normally used to may not be there. So you go out shopping, you get an extra one of these. You get an extra box of pasta. That'll last you a meal or two. Get an extra can of beans, if that's your thing. I'm hung up on beans. That's usually what we buy. An extra couple of things of tomato sauce. A couple of, things of that nature. If you have frozen food, and you say, well, I have a freezer load of stuff. Well, guess what? Now you have to plan out, because that's not going to be frozen forever. How are we going to power that freezer? Am I going to have a generator? Now you're going to say, well, I have a generator. Well, generators run on fuel. Is it going to be a whole home generator run off of natural gas and the pipelines? The experts have told us maybe you get maybe 1 or 2 or maybe 3 days of reliable power, reliable gas pressure and fuel in the natural gas lines. I wouldn't count on it. So now you're going to figure out what you're going to plan for. Let's say you do the category 2 up to 72 hours. You have to have enough fuel for your generator for 72 hours, which means that prior to the disaster, you have to get the generator that you have. I'm going to assume it's going to be a portable one, and you're going to run it under load and see how long it takes to burn whatever the fuel is. So let's say you have a generator, a small 1800 watt one. It has approximately 2.5 gallon gas tank. You might be able, and I use that word in air quotes, 4 hours out of that. Which means 4 hours, that means you're going to have to do, if you want to run it continuously, you're going to go through, I'm going to assume, around 15 gallons of fuel a day. Well, where are you going to keep the fuel for that? Do you have to run it all the time? Maybe, maybe not. That's your food source. You may have to. So now you're at 15 gallons of fuel. After you're ready for 3 or 4 days, now you're dealing with 45 gallons of fuel, potentially, or more, of 3 days, maybe 60 gallons. That's a lot of fuel if you're dealing with gasoline. Propane, I don't have it figured out how much that is, but maybe one day I will. You have to plan that out days ahead of time, how you're going to do that. And again, let's use Superstorm Sandy. That's my experience up in the Northeast. My friends down in Florida were laughing at us all, saying, you don't have any fuel. Well, now we're in Superstorm Sandy for about 4 days. Gas stations did not have fuel available because they had no power. Now you have an issue. Now in New Jersey, New York area, gas stations are required to have backup generators to deliver fuel. But how much fuel does a gas station have, especially in an emergency where people are hoarding? They're going to flood that station. I remember there were lines around the block for people getting gas. One of my clients hired me just to stand online and get fuel for their equipment. That's what it was. And okay, Jim, here's 5 gallons. They're giving out 5 gallons at a time. When you fill that 5 gallons up, here's another 5 gallon thing, and get back online. That's got to be planned out ahead of time. About how long do you want? Again, if it's the middle of winter, you may not have to worry about freezers up here in the Northeast. Especially if it's for the brutal winter, you may be able, that may be work to your advantage in this situation with stuff in the freezer, stuff in the refrigerator. But then what do you have to worry about? You have to worry about security. You got to worry securing it. You got to worry about animals. You have to worry about all that other stuff. All of this goes ahead. Now, let's talk about special needs. Diabetic. Is anyone you're responsible for, or are you diabetic? Guess what? You're not going to. Do you have enough? We won't talk about medicine this time, but do you have appropriate food for a diabetic to keep the level? So you don't go with high blood sugar or low blood sugar. The room, Jodie Foster movie, Panic Room, I think that was the name of the movie, early 2000s to mid-2000s, went into this with a type 1 diabetic child in an emergency situation in a panic room with terrorists and everything, whatever it was, I forget. But anyway, went into this. Let's say that you have people with allergies. I know one family where every person in that family has a different allergy to food, has a different food allergy. Well, guess what? The mother cannot have raw food, the father cannot have filbert/hazelnuts, and the children, I forget what they're allergic to. But now you have I think it's a peanut or nut allergy. Now you have a situation. The survival food that you're buying, is it dangerous for them? I don't know. I have no idea. And now let's talk about time. You feel like a survival diet is roughly around 800 to 900 calories a day. All right, that's not a lot. No, your sandwich, your hamburger from your average fast food place is like 1,500 calories. So can you get by on 800 or 900 calories a day? If you're doing intermittent fasting, like I was doing, that's how much I was doing. It's not easy with that low amount of calorie yield. Plus, you're in a disaster. You may need more calories because you're out there working. Again, all has to be worked out ahead of time. So 3 or 4 days, you could probably have enough in your house to do that, all right, in there. Okay, now let's talk about 1 month. Are you going to be able to have 1 month's worth of food in your house? That's an issue. That's a lot of room. Again, with the water that as we previously discovered. Big issue here. Now, let's talk about supermarkets. And even me, a experienced prepper, I'm one of the preppers out there. I'm one of the 3% of the population, 5% that I've been involved with this. I wrote a book on this way back in the day on nuclear terrorism. I was shocked with the pandemic lockdowns. What's the first thing that went in the stores? At least here in lovely Clarkstown, New York. The meats went. I mean, dude, the only thing that was left was like blood sausage. And being of Eastern European ethnicity, specifically Polish and German, both, it turns out the 23andMe DNA thing, I'm not giving them a plug, identifies both sides of the family came from the same area of Poland, and my father considered himself German, God rest his soul. Anyway, we had kishka. We have kishka. Well, guess what? All they had was blood sausage from England. I said, hey, that's kishka. We'll go for it. I liked it. You think my wife and kids wanted to eat kishka? Blood sausage? No, not really. Again, what was the other thing? Was the meat substitutes. And they're out there, right? They have all these meat substitutes. Those went. On top of that, those are the last things to go. What's the next thing that went? As far as, yeah, I know toilet paper and, yeah, great, paper product. Okay, great. But you had pasta in all its forms. Gone. You had dried beans in all their forms. Lentils, peas, gone. Dairy and milk, forget about it. Done. Orange juice and yogurt and all that. Yeah, all the dairy, pretty much shot. Done. Then you get into the comfort foods. Anything from chips to cookies and candy. Guess what? That's all gone. Okay, so I went in there and I was like, okay, pancakes. And I just went just for the hell of it. I said, okay, let me go in. Let's see pancakes. Kids like pancakes. Everybody likes pancakes. My daughter is a big fan of chicken and waffles, right? That's a story for another day. Okay, I can make waffles. I can do this. I go in there, no pancake mix. I said, okay, what we're going to do is we're going to go old school. We have a thing called the internet, and I can look up how to make a waffle and pancake mix from scratch. So what do you generally need? You need all-purpose flour, or pick your flour of choice. You need baking powder, and you need eggs. You can't get eggs because dairy aisle, nothing. You need milk. Now you got problems with milk. Well, they have the ready mix, stuff on there. Just regular, right, pancake mix, and nothing there. These are the things that are a struggle for any family out there. What are you going to eat that everyone's going to like, everyone's going to love? Because what happens is if you have food that no one likes, you're all going to be hungry, and you're going to get, especially with some people out there, screaming and yelling about the food. Our town supplemented all the children who were on lockdown, if you had a school-age child, with food. It was, so every day, or it turned out every week, you could go to a car line and they would give you basic food for children, right? For that, it would be like Rice Krispies or another cereal, and it had like a couple of cartons of milk, a couple of cartons of juice, things of that nature, because of the school, all part of the school lunch program. That's what happened also here in Clarkstown. Now we talk about longer term, 30 days out, 40 days out. What I used to, or often call primitive living. You start to have a food emergency more than 30 days out, and you got a problem. Hopefully by that time, the government or some other entity is going to be over there supplying food. And who knows what it's going to be, who knows what the quality is, who knows how it's going to taste. Everybody has the best intentions, but, people may not like things. So now what do you do? If you're in a rural area or in a semi-rural area, maybe a suburban environment, you say, well, we're going to go and we're going to get seeds. What I did many years ago was I got what was one of those survival seed banks. And what it was, I just wanted to see what it was. It was hermetically sealed seeds of all different vegetables that they put in a PVC pipe, and they had one end of the pipe sealed and the other end of the pipe sealed. So what the idea was that you would take this, bury it, or put it somewhere else in a secure location, and it would be preserved for however long the seeds are good for. I know a bunch of archaeologists in England, I think it was England, a number of years ago, found a whole boatload of seeds in some tomb. And they didn't know what they were, so they grew them. And guess what? The seeds grew after 800 years, and it was food that they had problems identifying because of all of the selective breeding in the last 700 or 800 years. It didn't look the same. So, gardening. How much are you going to get out of a garden? I have a 10 by 20 garden. We get maybe a week's worth of vegetables out of it every year. If we're going to eat vegetables, maybe 2 weeks. 2 weeks would probably be better if we're eating everything out of that garden every day, 3 meals a day. And you have to be selective on what you're going to plant. So don't think that you're going to get a survival seed bank and you're going to start, we're going to go and it's going to be lovely and we're going to go and we're going to start doing stuff. That's not going to happen. What's going to happen is you have to learn to do gardening. Gardening is a skill, and believe it or not, it's a somewhat perishable skill. You got to figure out what grows in your area. What are the appropriate crops, the food crops? Don't think that you're going to go and throw a bunch of beefsteak tomatoes in your garden, the seeds, and guess what? In 60 days, we're going to have all these beefsteak tomatoes. Well, guess what? There are certain zones that you have to consider. Too far north, too far south, water, right? Again, where you're going to be watering these crops, where are you going to get the water from? I think the rule of thumb was for a family of 4, feed someone for a year, feed a family for a year, you needed, back in the day, something like 3/4 of an acre or an acre full of food, of gardening, right? Of a farm. And then on top of that, how do you preserve that food? Wildlife. I had to actually go out and I had to build a fortress. I mean, sides with fine mesh and roof, because I had animals crawling all over this thing, going after those zucchini. My wife's prized zucchini plants. Guess what? That's something else you need to consider is all of this stuff. Bugs. Certain kind of bugs are destructive. Guess what? What kind of crops are you going to plant and everything else? And of course, what happens? What always happens? You get everything there and it's all grown and it's good. Now you have somebody coming around and stealing your food. That can actually happen, longer term disaster. Spices, coffee, tea, alcohol. You listen to our February program on with Imogene Salva, our show on concentration camps in the Soviet Union. Certain things became a commodity. What became a commodity? Cigarettes, alcohol. Today, what would it be? Cigarettes, alcohol. Back then, same thing, coffee, sugar, or other sweeteners, any spices you could imagine. Because you got to make that survival food, and you got to start cooking. Now you have to worry about spices. How many spices? Do you want bland food? Again, psychologically, you got to keep people fed. There's some security with that. All that stuff goes into this. What kind of spices are you going to have? How long do the spices last? No. Those are, one of these staple items that went in the supermarkets here during the lockdown were spices. You couldn't get sugar. You couldn't get salt even. You couldn't get any other sweeteners, artificial or natural. Now let's get on to another alternative here. There is an alternative. Let's say you're in a suburban or rural area. Are there any surrounding farms, orchards, other places that grow food? Can you get to know the farmer, the farmer's family, anything like that? Make a deal with the farmer rather than go to a supermarket, buy direct from the supplier, from the farm, farmers markets, that sort of thing. Developing relationships, getting to know each other. You may be able to develop a relationship with a local farmer or a similar person and maybe go and buy your food direct, get your food direct. Maybe have a barter situation because everyone needs something. That's where I would probably go if I had the wherewithal and the means, so we had a local farmer. Get to know them. Pooling resources. This is another one. Can you pool resources with your neighborhood for food supplies, for what have you? Because if you have people who you could trust in your neighborhood, this might make your job a little bit easier. With that, often, like with Superstorm Sandy, we actually had a very informal neighborhood watch going on because we knew that communications were down, but one person had a radio, one person, that was me, had internet access through my car with the internet in the car. But that's another thing we'll talk about is communication. But with food, pooling resources. That might be a way of handling things. Fallback positions. Let's say you have a fallback position, you have a second home, you have a relative far away. Could you store food over there? Make a deal with that person? I don't know. What does it come down to? All this, for food and water. It's assessing what your situation is. Analyzing the situation and then acting appropriately. Just in planning out this stuff or thinking about it, you're going to be way ahead of everybody else in a disaster. And that too is another front in the safety war that we're always talking about fighting and winning here. For Safety Wars, this is Jim Poesl.
In the professional safety community, communication and planning are just a few keys to your program's success. The question many practitioners have is, where do I start? Dr. Jay Allen, the creator of the Safety FM platform and host of the Rated R Safety Show, has built a global foundation to help you along the way. Go to safetyfm.com and listen to some of the industry's best and most involved professionals, including Blaine Hoffman with the Safety Pro, Sam Goodman with the Hop Nerd, Sheldon Primus with the Safety Consultant, Jim Poesl with Safety Wars, Emily Elrod with Unapologetically Bold, and many others. As individuals, we can do great things, but as a team, we become amazing. Dial into safetyfm.com today and surround yourself with a powerful force of knowledge and support.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and its guest and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of the company. Examples of analysis discussed within this podcast are only examples. They should not be utilized in the real world as the only solution available, as they are based only on very limited and dated open source information. Assumptions made within this analysis are not reflective of the position of the company. No part of this podcast may be reproduced, stored in a retrieval system, or transmitted in any form or by any means, mechanical, electronic, recording, or otherwise, without prior written permission of the creator of the podcast, Jay Allen.